What's up everybody, Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick and I have an album review for you. So one that I've been kind of keeping my eye on just because I've been very curious about it ever since single after single has been released was the newest project slash I guess solo project. I don't know. It's called Ibaraki and the album is called Rashomon. And this comes out on the 6th of May on Nuclear Blast Records. This is the first project from this one-man band. I'm going to get into that a little bit because there's a lot of people to cover on this. This band was initially formed in 2012 under the name Mrituyu. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong. Either way, they changed their name to Ibaraki, which is a Japanese demon, I believe, in like Japanese mythology. And well, this is a one-man project, essentially. It is Matt Heafy from Trivium. This is his one-off project, but it also involves a lot of famous faces. Now, when it comes down to, I believe, the rounding out of the studio band, it is essentially the rest of Trivium, but there are some other important, notable people on here, namely Isan. Isan and essentially his entire family are on here. His wife, his daughter, and his son all contribute vocals. Isan does guitars, vocals, and he also did a lot of production and engineering on this. But this even has some other interesting guests, namely Nurgle from Behemoth and Gerard Way from My Chemical Romance is on here too. So there's a lot going on here, and well, all right, going on Metal Archives, which I was actually surprised this was on Metal Archives, they actually had this listed as metalcore, mainly because it's probably Matt Heafy and like, that's a safe bet. You guys were off. You guys were off by kind of a lot. This is more in the realm of prog metal. I would say this is a flat out prog album, and it is a very interesting one. Now, quick side note, all the song titles are in Japanese, so get ready for me to butcher that language too. But this definitely has a sort of a theme to it, and this is quite possibly the most ambitious thing I think I have ever heard Matt Heafy do. This is well beyond the realms of anything super proggy or, you know, wide-reaching in terms of Trivium. And I think that is large in part to having Isan with him on this in terms of a producer and a co-writer on here. He actually shares songwriting duties. And you can definitely hear it in some tracks, and actually you can hear where the two styles definitely collide, but I'll get more into that. But I think the fact that these two have worked together before, actually Matt Heafy was on Arctis, and it's a killer fucking album. I think that sort of familiarity with one another and working with one another for a number of years actually kind of really worked here because this doesn't feel very forced. Now, the intro and the outro I have to bring up, which they are just decidedly different than anything else. The opening intro, Hakanaki Hitsuzan, I think. Maybe Don't Hit Susan? That seems like a bad idea. Anyway, the opening intro sounds like Godfather. It's very much the sort of like classic mafioso dance and the parlor wedding dance. I don't know. It's very different, especially when you're looking at the cover. You're expecting more like Japanese themed music, and you hear essentially the Godfather score, which it's very interesting. Like it does build in tension. I don't know if it sets up what you're getting into very well, but it is interesting just in terms of intros. They do a little bit more with it in terms of the outro Kaizoku, which is Godfather Part 2, maybe, starring Google Bordello. Very interesting, and it's almost kind of whimsical and, I don't know, like a Tim Burton sort of score thing, like a Danny Elfman vibe, except it's very dark and, I don't know, like foreboding when it comes down to the lyrics, but when it comes down to delivery, it's very bouncy and strange. But let's get away from the intros and outros because the bookends are interesting, but the bulk of this is an absolutely wild ride. Once you get past the intro Katu Suchi, this song pretty much introduces you to a lot of elements you're going to hear all over here. Lots of ornate strings and keys and lots of layering, but behind that, tons of big chunky riffs. Comes in kind of, you know, thrashy, a little bit of a D beat, like a nice high energy track, but in the background you hear very ornate strings, like plucked bows and almost maybe a banjo, I don't know. But it's very thrashy, very proggy, but it's that very eclectic kind of proggy. Like there's a lot of stuff in here that reminded me of like Devin Townsend or Haken or even Dream Theater at their strangest when it comes down to writing like a very ornate bridge. Now a lot of this is carried by Matt Heafy's big vocals, both in growls and cleans, and this song has a really good clean chorus, but it's this very strange bridge that comes up that really grabbed me. It seems as though the vocals kind of slowly get pushed more to the front as the music behind it gets dropped back a little bit and gets a little bit more muffled, but it's a blast beat, but the music behind it is very clean. Again, like all these little ornate strings come through and kind of make it like a more symphonic affair, but his vocals kind of soar over it, and then it breaks into like full-on progressive metal, progressive rock territory. You get these very cool clean sections. It's like he's channeling King Crimson for a little bit before locking back onto that sort of thrashy groove initially. And that was essentially the setup for me. Like I had only listened to a couple of songs and I knew this was going to be different, but this is essentially the setup for most of this album in terms of like wild transitions, stylistically all over the place, and again, sort of a larger than life sort of feel to the album. Like this is a very ambitious album again. Like he's really pulling from a lot of different camps, and most of the time this really works. Songs like Jigoku Dayu and Ronin are both larger than life prog songs. Jigoku Dayu has a nice slow build to it. It's very clean, very sing-songy too, and I have to give Matt Heafy some credit on his clean vocals on here. He really pushed himself because there's some really awesome like vocal dynamics all over this when it comes down to his cleans. His growls are a little bit more uniform, like he kind of just does his standard shout, and I mean they work for the heavy parts, but I kind of wish he would put as much effort into the growls as he does the cleans, because the cleans he definitely seems to have like pushed himself more. The growls are kind of just there to round out the heavier parts. But this song starts off very soft. It's actually probably the softest run of melodies on here. There's really cool vocal harmonies. Again, Isan's entire family and Isan are also singing here, and you get a lot of cool vocal harmonies in there, and then it just explodes into almost kind of black metal there for a second. There's a lot of killer guitar work, which again, with the people that are associated with this, you kind of expect that, but I really like the clever riffing on there. And then towards the end, there's this really strange blast beat section with this kind of like poppy, pulsating synth kind of behind it. And again, I just feel like there were a lot of ideas on here, and they were just kind of like, let's see what kind of works. Let's get a little wild. Let's get some stuff that doesn't necessarily fit together and see if it works. And this was one of those moments where it kind of works. It's just sort of a strange synth pattern behind, well, like these kind of cold, dissonant, kind of heavy riffs. And surprisingly, it's just sort of a strange contrast that works. And Ronin is the longest track in here at over 9 minutes, and as actually one of the singles is, again, one of the proggiest songs. It's a very dark and melancholy song with, Matt Heafy doing pretty much all clean vocals, and surprisingly, when it comes down to the harsh vocals, it's Gerard Way. I figured it would kind of be the other way around, but he comes in on these kind of black metal sections and shrieks his ass off, and man, I was kind of sitting there waiting for a clean section. I was like, yeah, that kind of sounds like Gerard Way, like him singing. No, it was him doing the growls. Like, I thought it was actually Isan in there doing, growls, and no, I was way off. So Gerard Way can do black metal vocals. Pretty cool. But this song has an absolutely great chorus on there. There's a really cool hook on it, and I like the whole shift in moods on it. And moods are definitely a big thing on here. Like, you do have some more like whimsical sections here and there. Again, Devin Townsend's sort of a good comparison to a lot of this stuff, but you also have some flat out brutal and heavy moments on here. Tamashi no Hokai and Akuma are probably the two heaviest tracks on here, and honestly I think this is where Isan's writing took over a little bit more. It's a little bit more black metal centric, and it's a little bit more Emperor style black metal centric. It's a little bit more symphonic. You get big string sections. There's probably synth horns in there too. I don't know, like this whole mix is huge and really done well. Again, Isan really good at producing too. But these songs definitely embody more of the black metal side, namely like more symphonic black metal, and they get very dark and heavy, but not without their interesting moments. Tamashi no Hokai, has a very interesting start. You actually hear the Mario coin noise right from the rip, and then it just goes full bore into like symphonic black metal, and you're kind of just sitting there going, wait, did I just hear what I thought I heard? And while I like the overall vibe of that whole song being, again, more dark and sinister and definitely more close to Emperor, the chorus is just kind of odd. It kind of feels needlessly poppy for such a dark song. It definitely has a lot of fun on the bridge just in terms of like, you know, kind of a jazz fusion-y sort of feel on some of the riffs. But the overall feel is very dark and foreboding, and with that clean chorus, it just doesn't quite capture it. But in terms of flat-out brutality, there is no song on here heavier than Akumu. Akumu is more along the lines of death metal. It is loaded with nasty, groovy breakdowns, bone-crunching riffs, and Nurgle and Heafy both just sticking with the harsh vocals for the most part and just crushing it. And even while I think the focus on that track is to be the heaviest track on there, you still get a lot of proggy nuance, but you get more along the lines of like earlier Opeth, like Blackwater Park, Deliverance, that sort of thing. Like it's still brutal as hell, but you get these really cool angular riffs that definitely scream a little too sophisticated for your just standard, you know, knuckle-dragging death metal. And this album definitely has a lot of fun with like weird proggy melodies. The song Komorebi, I think I said that probably wrong. Anyway, the song has like one of those melodies like you could say is Middle Eastern, but you could also say is like, you know, East Indian too, like in terms of like sitars versus ouds, like they kind of sound similar, but they both kind of give you that same vibe. It has a melody that sort of snakes its way through most of the song, and honestly, the entire time I heard it, I was like, wow, did they just try to like do like a proggy snake charmer sort of melody? Because it's kind of just a little melody that sort of slithers through the song and kind of creates its own little interesting vibe. It's a very interesting piece. It really doesn't get that heavy, but it's not exactly like a soft song. Like it's a very kind of dark and weird song, and the clean vocals sound like especially somber on here. And that was, you know, kind of the thing, like listening to this, it feels like a collection of stories. And there's like definitely like a sort of narrative sort of flow to this with all the peaks and valleys and everything. And it kind of gave it a really an interesting feel. And that actually made this sort of sink in a little bit more with the whole feel that this is a collection of stories, or rather just one story. And I don't know, it kind of gives it a real cohesive feel to the entire album. Now, with most stories, you do have spots that do drag, though. I mean, the opening and closing, I think, are interesting, but at the same time, tonally, they feel kind of far removed from the rest of the album. Well, outside of the end of Suzanu no Mikoto, that kind of goes like full bore like Danny Elfman towards the end, and it kind of plays off of Kaizoko a little bit, the last track. But at the same time, tonally, when it comes down the entire album, it just feels a little off, but still kind of fun and creative. But the song Ronin, there is a section towards the end where they kind of just drag out this one section, and it goes on for a few measures too long, and it kind of like hurts the, you know, flow of the song, because the rest of the song I think is fantastic. It's just this one spot really drags a bit. And admittedly, sometimes this can be a bit much. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's a very busy album. So you can kind of get lost in some of the wild transitions here, and the transitions can be very extreme on here. I think there are definitely points in here where Ihsahn's writing style and Matt Heafy's writing style kind of collided. But for the most part, it really worked, and this is a very interesting, cohesive, if not kind of wild album, and I really did not expect this from Matt Heafy. This isn't really knocking Matt Heafy at all. The dude's immensely talented, but this sort of like proggier realm, even at Trivium's most progressive moments, it's not like this. Now, on the flip side of the coin, this is the kind of stuff I expect from Ihsahn. Ihsahn is very eclectic, and he's pulling, again, from all sorts of different camps. Like, progressive stuff has kind of been his thing, I would say, even in Emperor. Emperor was kind of musically ahead of a lot of the black metal pack too. And once he made the shift to more progressive material with the solo work, you could definitely hear that he was an incredibly accomplished musician very early on and was only getting better. So in a way, this is kind of both unfamiliar, at least in one side of this, and very familiar in one side of this, but it comes together really well. And honestly, this was a very interesting listen. Like, I was definitely engaged in this, and it was a lot of fun. I kind of like the unpredictability of this album. It's a very strange album, but it's also very easy to get lost in, and it's easy to get mesmerized by, because this is just really fucking good. So overall, I'm gonna give this 4 stars. I think this is Well, pretty fucking exemplary. And again, I know Matt Heafy is an incredible musician. He's a great guitarist and a pretty solid singer, but I did not expect this from him. Like, this is kind of beyond the little box that I mistakenly placed him in. I think Isan's box is quite a bit bigger, but this definitely fits more with him. But yeah, the songs are absolutely fantastic on here. The album flows really well. There's a little bit of like just extra to it sometimes. Like, this does clock in at a little bit over an hour, but it doesn't really drag. It actually kind of holds your attention, and even at its weirdest moments, you're like, well, I'm still paying attention, and this is just kind of strange, but overall, it gels together really well. It's very cohesive, and again, I'm surprised. Like, I really didn't have a lot of expectations for this, even after listening to a couple of the singles. I was like, well, I don't know what this is going to be. But overall, this is essentially like a kind of blackened Devin Townsend-esque sort of wild prog album, and it's a lot of fun. And if you're a fan of Isan, or you're a fan of Matt Heafy, or you're just a fan of really wild prog, or even black metal and death metal and metalcore, it's kind of all in there. Definitely check this out. Honestly, this might be one of my favorite things that he's done. Now, granted, I'm going to give this album a little bit more time and listen to it, but I think this is definitely his most creative and most ambitious output yet, and I would like to hear more already. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there'll be a link down below. We are going to include a new segment, but that'll probably start after MDF, just because we're kind of busy up until then. But we're going to start doing some more stuff on Patreon. We'll also have a link down there for thrallsmetal.com. If you would like to order one of our t-shirts, you can click a link right down there. Again, thank you all so much for watching, subscribing, following us. It is still a fuck ton of fun doing this, and you guys are the fucking reason that, and well, we like listening to music too, but you guys, that's probably the main reason. Plenty more stuff coming your way. So with that, I thank you all once again, and we will catch you later.